Belal Muhammad returned once again to the JRE podcast, and I have a couple of thoughts about this particular subject and the reaction to some of the subject matters that were discussed. For example, I think that one of the most underrated stories that Belal Muhammad has going on is the fact that his wrestling coach is now his main coach. And not only that, he's also a Muslim convert based on the dawah of Belal Muhammad. On top of the fact that, did I mention his coach is a former PFL champion? Which, by the way, one of the most interesting aspects that I took out of that was the UFC not signing him because they felt that he was too old. At a certain point, when he won the PFL middleweight championship, they felt as if he was not marketable enough, or it was one of those situations where they just preferred to sign somebody that was a little bit younger because they were going to get more years out of them. For example, if you were to sign the coach of Belal Muhammad, the former PFL champion, into the UFC at an age of, let's say, early 40s, you got to ask yourself as a company how much of his time is going to be worth for your investments towards this fighter. And the answer is, well, maybe very limited. As a result of those limits, it is the reason why we weren't able to see how he was going to compete in the UFC. Also, what they talk about were some subject matters regarding, let's say, what do you call it? Oh, what is this? Hold on a second. We're on to something here. Oh, wow, what is this? A little, Okay. All right. So, I thought it was interesting to share. Again, this is the beauty of this show, my guy. You never know what I'm going to show in this particular video or live stream or whatever I got going on. But you guys saw what you saw and make of that as you will. So, okay. Here's one thing that I think is really interesting to bring up, okay? Joe Rogan asked Belal Muhammad about the cardio or the training method in which the trainer of Belal Muhammad operated under, which is what? Using a lot of explosions, using a lot of plyometrics, which, by the way, is very underrated. I also thought that it was interesting that Belal Muhammad mentioned the type of weight training that he does, right? It's not really as elaborative as, let's say, George St. Pierre used to do a lot of explosions. And although what's interesting is that at some point, George St. Pierre started applying low-impact training, which exactly is what? Low-impact training is something to the effect of, let's say, doing a lot of stretching, doing a lot of different things for your body in terms of recovery, doing different methods of, let's say, light sparring in some days, in some aspects. So again, not to try to bore you into the aspects of Belal Muhammad's training methods, although it is interesting to point out, because one thing that is important is that there has to be a certain regimented aspect of stamina training, which, by the way, Belal Muhammad definitely delves into a lot. And once again, that is one of the factors that you need if you want to be, let's say, a high-level world champion, right? Those are some of the aspects that you need. High explosive training, stamina-based type of fighting methods. Again, weaponizing the pace. which I think is really important in Belal Muhammad's game. I think that right there is what is going to separate him from a lot of these welterweights that are out there right now. How would he do against Ian Gary? They talked about that. How would he do against Shavkat? How would he do against Usman? And by the way, here's another interesting type of conversation that I think you can take out of Belal Muhammad's conversation with Joe. He mentions something to the effect of Khabib saying that sometimes some people retire a little too early, or rather retire a little too late, right? I thought that was really interesting that he had brought that up, and I'm going to tell you why. Because here's something you got to understand, right? When it comes to guys staying for too long, I think it can be very detrimental to their health and their overall performance the longer that they stay in these high-level matches and high-level fights that they have to constantly engage themselves upon. Because you got to remember, right? I know a lot of guys that fight in the regional scenes, okay? When, let's say, 40 years old or something like that, right? By the way, this is one of the beauties of this particular content. You never know where I'm going to be. You never know what I'm going to do. I don't edit any of these things. I'm as real as it gets, and that's what it is. So going back to what I was saying, man, I'm going off the tangent here with what I was saying. Okay, so I know a lot of guys that are in their 40s that fight in the regional scenes, okay? I know a guy out here in Sacramento. I believe his name is Jamie Jara. He was the owner, and if not, one of the most prominent members of this gym out here in Sacramento called Team Carnage. He fought up until his 40s. I think he fought a Bellator fight, which, by the way, was the regional version of the Bellator, but Bellator nonetheless, and a whole bunch of King of the Cage fights, which, by the way, is regional. I think this is sustainable, okay, because there's just a certain level in the regional scenes that you just don't get in, let's say, the UFC. So it's less dangerous. But if you're fighting in the UFC, if you're Kamaru Usman, who's hitting 40, on top of the fact that he has a lot of knee issues stemming from the days of wrestling, you got to think, right? There's limits to your body. And at some point, you're going to get broken down even worse, especially if you are in a situation where you are fighting the best guys in the world. So now that you're Belal Muhammad, the world is your oysters in terms of who you want to fight, right? What I took out of that conversation is that it seems Belal Muhammad is, how do I say this? He's going to be one of those fighters that are going to take all comers. Okay? The fact that he's willing to fight Shavkat first, look, here's the thing, right? He may fight Usman, he may fight Shavkat, but the fact that he's throwing Shavkat there as a number one choice tells you a lot about his character as a champion. He wants to test himself, and not only that, he wants to fight the best guys in the world that have a hard puzzle to solve, because let's face it, Shavkat is at a 100% finish rate. All of his fights are finishes. So he is basically the Arthur Beterbiev of MMA, if you really think about it, and their weight classes are within close proximity, because obviously 175 and 170 in the UFC is almost the same thing, right? But it is a hard puzzle to solve, and what I think is really interesting about Belal Muhammad is that he's willing to try and solve this puzzle, and I think that he can. And why is that? because of what I just mentioned earlier. You have to be able to weaponize pace. The way that Belal Muhammad was able to train, the way that Belal Muhammad was able to, let's say, build his body up in the training regimens that he did, which, by the way, consisted of full body workouts or isolated strength workouts such as bench presses and things of that nature, or squats. And here's an interesting thing, right? A lot of the weightlifter guys are going to be very shocked to hear this, but most fighters lift literally only once or twice a week. And if you are really trying to build your strength up or trying to build a certain level of conditioning or athletic ability, maybe you'll do it 3 times a week. But no more than that, because obviously there is hyper focus on the combat athletic methods of things, right? Training the application of combat, the striking, the grappling, and all of these drills that you have to continuously do, and the repetitions that you have to emulate round after round. That has to be in prime focus. And I also thought that it was interesting that Belal Muhammad's coach has the same philosophy as Khabib, which is what? Wrestle. Wrestling is a very important aspect of mixed martial arts, right? In fact, I'm going to be very confident into saying it's 80% of mixed martial arts. Wrestling is 80% of mixed martial arts. Now, why is that? Well, for the simple fact that everything is predicated on wrestling. For one, what are some of the things that Belal Muhammad mentioned with Joe Rogan? He said to him, you know what? This is what our coach does, right? We do hand fighting for 2 minutes, and then we do, I don't know, push-ups in between that or something to that extent. And then what it does is it prevents a lot of guys from really hitting hard during the sparring right after. Because this is what I mentioned with the Dricus du Plessis conversation in the last few videos. I had mentioned that Dricus du Plessis' technique does not look as crisp as you would see in Israel Adesanya, due to the fact that the lactic acid that he builds up in the way that he trains gives him those certain habits. And therefore, it is instinctual now for him to throw a punch a certain way, as awkward as it looks. But with the attributes that he has gained through the physicality, makes up for the lack of that technique. And this is why I say there is no right way or wrong way to do anything in mixed martial arts within the other compository sports that are involved in it, but rather it is an application of sport that is literally a sport of its own and can't be compared to or somehow judged in the same metric as, let's say, boxing. Because in boxing, guess what? What are you just really dealing with? Just nothing but punches all day long, and then your foot moving and this and that, but you don't ever lift your feet. You don't ever use it as a strike. You don't ever use it as a method of weaponry. So I also thought one of the interesting conversations that they had brought up was that there's a lot of guys that are, let's say, high-level strikers, right? Oftentimes, they want to avoid doing grappling classes or grappling sessions. And I think a big part of that is based on their ego. It's sort of like you're an expert in one particular field, right? And you know your stuff, you know everything that consists of this subject matter. But the issue is that now you have to try a new discipline that you're not familiar with. And 9 times out of 10, if you're trying something new, you're going to look like a fool. And that is where the ego comes in with a lot of these high-level strikers. They avoid it. You don't know how many boxers or how many Muay Thai fighters I know that reject me when I tell them, hey, let's go to grappling class, or let's go to a grappling session, or come to my garage gym and we'll just do grappling sessions. They don't want to do it. I'll tell you why, because